Welcome to Guildford Borough Council's annual Economic Forum 2022. I haven't really quite used to saying that just yet. Thank you all for attending this morning, and in particular thank you to our guest speakers who we will hear from: Marcus Wright from Royal Bank of Scotland, Amelia Hadfield of the University of Surrey, and my colleague Claire Morris. Marcus and Amelia will both be giving presentations together with the Council's own Director of Resources, Claire. There will be opportunities to ask questions after each speaker, but we'd like to ask you to submit them using the chat function during the presentations, please. If time permits, we will open up the session to general questions at the end and invite people to the stage to ask their questions direct of the panel of speakers. Before our main speakers, though, I'd like to hand over to the Leader of the Council to say a few words about our Shaping Guildford Futures programme. Jos.
Thank you, Dawn, and good morning, everybody. After the trials and tribulations of the past 2 years, I think there's cause for optimism as we enter 2022. I've spoken at previous events highlighting the plans and the ambitions of this council, and 2022 will start to see delivery on some of those ambitions. For too long, a lack of appropriate housing, the twin blights of traffic congestion and pollution, and the threat of flooding has constrained the ability of this borough to achieve its economic potential. We're determined to tackle these problems head on and provide an environment where your businesses can thrive. There are a number of exciting projects that will start this year. The station redevelopment, whilst controversial, will deliver a brand new station, improved connections, and a significant number of new homes in our town centre. The new owners of the Debenham site are working quickly and have already submitted a planning application, again delivering investment, homes, and improved public realm to our underutilised riverside. The council has its own projects, the Wayside Urban Village and Guildford Park Road, which will deliver close to 2,000 homes, and we're close to agreeing terms with St Edwards for the redevelopment of the North Street site, again delivering homes alongside a brand new bus terminal and more pedestrianisation of our town centre. However, above all these projects sits our most ambitious endeavour, shaping Guildford's future. We need a master plan for our town, and we need it to be informed by listening to those that live and work here. The council's ambition is to breathe new life into the town by opening up the riverside, reducing congestion, improving alternative, sustainable and affordable transportation, as well as making the centre a more attractive place to live, work and visit. Guildford is a highly desirable and successful town with a unique character. However, over time there has been a decline which needs to be addressed to re-establish its standing in Surrey and in the wider region. With changing economic patterns in retail and the increasing demands for affordable housing, the council recognises that Guildford needs a resilience and growth plan to defend itself against economic seepage to competitor towns. If you have not already done so, I would encourage everyone to look at the dedicated master plan website, which is www.shapingguildford.co.uk. Engage with this process. If you have a spare hour tomorrow, there is a webinar looking specifically at how we can ensure the growth of our borough is sustainable. As an elected politician, I'm all too aware of people telling me about the things they don't like. This is an opportunity for everyone to be involved at the outset of this plan and tell us what you do want. For this plan to succeed, it needs to be representative of our whole community. Comprehensive engagement will make for a better plan, and I'm looking forward to seeing what amazing ideas are out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jos. I won't take any questions on Jos at this time. I'll wait till the end of all the presentations, if that's okay. So thank you again, Jos, and I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Claire Morris. Claire is a qualified accountant with significant experience in local government finance, and she moved to Guildford in 2013 and initially as Head of Financial Services and Deputy Chief Finance Officer, before becoming our Chief Finance Officer, and then being promoted to Director of Resources. During her time at Guildford, Claire has played a prominent role in all aspects of the Council's finances, including Treasury management. She is a lead finance advisor in respect of a number of the Council's transformation projects. Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Dawn, and just bear with me, colleagues, whilst I attempt to share my screen. I'm hoping that has worked and that colleagues on the call can see my screen. So thank you everybody for joining us this morning. I'm sure many of you have attended these events before and have become familiar with some of the information that I give out on an annual basis. This morning I just wanted to cover again COVID grants as well as the council's budget. Obviously this time last year when we spoke we were in the middle of various lockdowns, and we'd been through an enormous amount of turbulence with the COVID crisis, which had resulted in the council providing significant support to our businesses on behalf of the government. The same is continuing through 2021-2022. So this year we have provided the government's restart grants. We've paid out 5.9 million to 689 businesses within the borough. And we've also had something known as the additional restrictions grant, where we've received 5.2 million since November 2020, which we've paid out to 254 businesses who didn't meet the main criteria for the retail, leisure and hospitality grants or the other mandatory grants that the council was able to give. We had a little bit of the ARG grant left, so we launched our COVID Business Growth Fund just before Christmas, where we were giving out grants to of 388,000, which we're about to give out soon to 55 businesses. And the aim of that fund was to support businesses to diversify and move into new markets if they had been hit by the COVID crisis. Whilst we were doing that, we went into Plan B and Omicron hit us. So the government has now given us new Omicron hospitality and leisure grants. We've been awarded 1.4 million and we can distribute up to £6,000 grant per business premise that meets the criteria. It does depend on the rateable value, so obviously some businesses with lower rateable values will get less than that, but if your rateable value is of sufficient quantity, then £6,000 is the maximum grant we can give you for your premises. We've also been awarded a further £312,000 to distribute under the additional restrictions grant, and we will be launching that scheme in the next few weeks. I've included on the slide, excuse me, a link to the page on our website where you can find out further information about those grants. In addition to the grants, we've been asked to award a number of business rate discounts to businesses. There was the retail, leisure and hospitality discounts last year. We've been given the COVID additional relief fund, which can provide further rate discounts for 2021-2022 for those businesses that have been infected by the pandemic but are ineligible for other rate discounts. The funds are limited and generally we're targeting the businesses that have previously qualified for the additional relief grant, where they have premises as well as grants. We're working out the discount scheme at the moment and we'll invite applications in the next week or two. The expanded retail and nursery discounts that many businesses received in 2020-21 have continued into 2021-22, and it's likely that they will continue into 2022-2023, but are likely to reduce to 50%. So those businesses in the retail, leisure and hospitality sector are likely to qualify for a 50% discount on their business rates. So just on to the council's budget, just setting the scene. Obviously, like many businesses in the borough, we've been heavily impacted by the COVID crisis. Even after the support and the very generous support that we received from the government, we reported an overspend of £6 million against our budget last year, which reduced our reserves. For 2021-2022 to date, we were reporting before Christmas a net overspend against our budget of around 2.9 million. We've put in place an action plan to address that overspend and mitigate the further impact on reserves, which are mainly one-off measures and not ongoing savings. We think that plan is starting to work, and it's quite likely that in our next budget monitoring report, Corporate Governance and Standards Committee we will be reporting that overspend has come down. So we're hoping that we'll be starting 2022-2023 with having balanced the budget for 21-22 again, but likely to be with reduced reserves following the overspend from last financial year. The Future Guildford transformation programme has delivered around £8 million worth of savings over the last 2 years, and we have a significant programme of savings as part of our medium-term financial strategy as we move forward over the next 4 years. So just to reiterate the kind of graph of doom that I think I present every year, just to show the trajectory of government funding to the council. So back in 2013-14, between the revenue support grant, the business rates and the new homes bonus, the council was receiving around about £8 million in support from central government. That gradually declined over the sort of 4 to 5 year period to 2018-19 and went up a little bit in 2019-20, principally due to the new homes bonus. Obviously in 2020-21 and also in 21-22, we have received some COVID grants, which has meant that our funding has gone back up again from government. But over time, as the government is going to need to be repaying the debt that it's taken on during the COVID crisis, we anticipate that our funding will fall back to 2019-20 levels going forward. So where does the money come from? Well, we raise around about 22% of our income in council tax. 21% of our income comes from property rents, and we get around about a quarter of our income from off-street parking. Then the remainder of our income streams are from smaller fees and charges that we charge for specific services, such as planning fees for development control. The retained business rates that we receive from government, or well, the amount of business rates that we're able to retain, should I say, accounts for around about 7% of our income. But as I will come on to in a bit, that accounts also, that 7% of our income only equates to around about 5% of the business rates that we collect in the borough. And where does it go to? Well, we provide a variety of services in our general funds, such as housing services, not so much as landlords to our tenants, but homelessness support services and housing advice, environmental health, community services, culture, heritage and leisure services, crematorium. Obviously, everybody's always familiar with waste and recycling and our parking services. Planning and development control, parks and countryside, and then our corporate services as well. In terms of the budget gap going forward, when we look at our income and expenditure, back in November when this report went to our executive committee, I was reporting a budget gap for the next financial year of 1.2 million. That was prior to receiving the local government finance settlement, which came on the 16th of November. And we were also projecting around about a £5 million budget gap over the next 4 years. Since November, we had the local government finance settlement, which was released on the 16th of December, which was positive news for us. The settlement funding assessment, which is our core grant or our core amount of business rates that we can keep from the government, remained as per 2020-21 and 2021 too. So there's no increase, but it didn't decrease, which was always a risk. We also received additional one-off grants of £760,000 for the new homes bonus. We have been compensated for the fact that the business rates multiplier is not increasing with inflation. And we had grants for lower tier services, and in particular a grant to support services of £202,000. And that was specifically said that that grant was to offset the national insurance increase that we, along with everybody else in business, has incurred. It is worth pointing out that the national insurance increase is costing us £343,000, and we've only been compensated to the tune of £202,000 through grant from the government. So it doesn't quite cover our costs, but they have given us some money to offset that increase. Due to the local government finance settlement, we think we will be able to balance our budget for 2022-2023. I'll report throughout today for the executive meeting next week. Although we still think we're going to have a budget gap of around 3.3 million over the medium-term plan period to 2025-2026. So in terms of how we're going to bridge that gap, we do have our savings strategy, which is enshrined within our medium-term financial strategy. And we had targets to achieve around about 2.3 million of savings on our discretionary services. We're looking at our review of operational assets, which we would like to hopefully generate around about 1.5 million of savings. We've done a significant review of our capital programme and significantly exceeded the level of savings in our borrowing costs and our interest costs as a result of that review. And we had a target for the collaboration with Waverley Borough Council of around about 1.5 million. We've already established roughly half of that amount. So in terms of future changes for businesses and us, the government is committed to conducting a fundamental review of business rates over the next couple of years. Alongside that will be a fundamental review of local government finance and potentially business rates as a funding source. We're expecting that review to launch prior to April 2023, but it has been delayed a number of times over recent years. The business rates will be also subject to a revaluation. Revaluations are likely to be on a 3-yearly cycle moving forward rather than a 5-yearly cycle. And it's established or anticipated that we will have a new rateable value from 1st of April 2023. So businesses will see a change in their business rate bills for the 2023-2024 financial year. The idea of moving to a 3-year revaluation cycle is that it should be more responsive to the changing economic conditions between revaluation periods. So in terms of what the budget is trying to deliver for businesses and also in terms of investment in our borough, as you'll have heard from Joss this morning, we're pursuing the delivery of our local plan and in particular investing in a new town centre master plan under the Guildford Economic Regeneration Programme, which we have now renamed Shaping Guildford's Future. We're investing in both infrastructure and also the redevelopment of sites within the town centre. And I've mentioned a few on the screen, but a number of them that are hoping to move forward quite significantly in the next few months will be the North Street development. Wayside Urban Village received planning back in the autumn, and we're continuing to work through the planning conditions as we start to implement that scheme. And we've got a number of other exciting projects as well. The Middleton Industrial Estate is near to completion on some of its phases. And the whole idea of doing these programmes is to revive Guildford Town Centre, to make sure that the council is financially sustainable into the future by having a vibrant local economy, to facilitate housing that people can afford and to create employment opportunities, both through the regeneration and in the businesses that take the accommodation that we're developing. And we'd like to support businesses to attract new inward investment through the development of our strategic sites. And as part of all that, we'll be looking for opportunities to invest in digital infrastructure and put in place smart places technology. So overall, in terms of messages, I'd like you to leave you with the fact that the council has a strong balance sheet, but we do have reducing reserves due to COVID. Our local income streams were heavily impacted by COVID, and the pace of the recovery of those income streams will dictate our financial position going forward. We have a strong level of investment, both in cash and property, and an ambitious capital programme relating to our regeneration strategy. We're hoping to support both businesses and economic growth. However, there are challenges ahead of all of us, as there are for you as well for us. And on that note, I don't know whether we want to take questions at the end or whether you would like to take questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That you're painting a really interesting picture there, and no mean feat to provide a balanced budget in these really stretched budget times. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think we'll take questions at the end as we are running a little bit behind schedule. So thank you very much, Claire. Really appreciate that presentation. And we've just put a note in the chat that we will, subject to confirmation by speakers, we will share the slides from today after the meeting with the post-meeting comms. Okay, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Marcus Wright is a senior economist, I can't even say that, at Royal Bank of Scotland, where he analyses economic dynamics to inform the bank's strategy. He heads up the forecasting and stress testing scenarios team and has over 15 years professional experience as an economist. He has previously worked for an investment trust and an economic development consultancy. His particular areas of interest are the UK economy, monetary policy, the climate transition, and China. He has a first-class degree in economic science from the University of Aberdeen, so he's absolutely well qualified to talk to us on this subject today. Marcus, over to you.
Morning, thank you very much. Hi everyone. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Economist presentation, needless to say, there's a host of charts. There's actually not that many. I've got about 8. I'm hoping to run through 8 topics over the next 10 minutes, and time for a bit of question and answer, hopefully. Okay, so I've got what I think are the most pertinent issues to discuss here today. First and foremost is, of course, it's about COVID. Been down on 2 years since this has had a material impact, and that's putting it lightly, on our lives, on the economy. What's the thoughts on 2022? There are, of course, big unknowns. Omicron shows that we are susceptible to new variants, of course, and that is an ever-present risk. Putting that aside, I'm optimistic. I think in reasonably quick time, we can normalise, life can normalise, and the sectors that have lagged the recovery, most impacted, the consumer-facing services part, can quite quickly get back to something more resembling normal. So at the moment, output in those sectors are 5% below the pre-COVID peak. So that was the hidden bit of data in last week's GDP release. The headline is, of course, we're above the pre-COVID peak when you lump everything together, which is great. It's fantastic progress, and sort of in line with the estimates that we'd made. So that was fantastic. And in that GDP data, long ago, pre-Omicron, it does seem like a long time ago, things were normalising, and they were normalising at a reasonably quick pace. Flights coming back, return to work, transport use was coming up. From the beginning, I thought that Omicron would be a short-lived interruption to that process of normalisation. So I think it gets back underway quite quick. And those, as I say, those sectors that have lagged, particularly travel, come back quite quick. So I like this chart because it speaks to, you know, some of the, I think one of the key parts in the wash-up of all this that will need to be discussed, the sort of pessimism that surrounded and really guided expectations on cases and beds occupied in this case against the reality. And that was, despite early data coming out of South Africa, that Omicron was manageable in many cases, that was ignored, and that was pessimism was allowed to kind of grip expectations and near-term outlook. So it's an optimistic take, and that really paves the way for what should be a decent year of growth. But there are profound challenges around the income squeeze that we've heard so much about and continue to do so. So what does it mean on the growth front? What do we think? What this graph is kind of saying is sort of normalization. So look at that pace of quarterly change, the dark, the navy coloured bar charts, and really by the second half of the year, you're looking at a kind of normal pace of growth in the UK economy. The factors that really drive the UK's economy's performance are kind of sort of taking hold. How many people you're able to put into work, your pace of productivity growth, how much capital accumulation you're doing, your sort of underlying sort of speed limit growth takes hold. Now, we can debate that, and there's certainly a lot of things that have happened over the past 2 years that will influence the pace at which we can grow, particularly around the labour market, how much people we put into work, the strength of our population growth, migration, etc. But the other factors have also been buffeted and impacted. I think the pace of capital accumulation, how much business investment we can expect, and by extension, productivity growth. But look, that's the story on growth, and the headline level is a really good figure. It's 5%. It's somewhat flattered by base effects, so that's why I look at these quarterly profiles. And you're looking, as I say, you're looking at normalisation in the second half of the year. What will be a big determinant of this and a big driver is what happens in the labour market. Been really optimistic on the labour market over the past year. Again and again, it's confounded expectations and coming. The data's just continued to be great. You know, the number of people we've put into work has been rather impressive. The number of people PAYE is 1.5% above its pre-COVID peak. That masks some interesting things underneath. There's been a shift out of self-employment into employee jobs. And actually, there's still 640,000 people who are economically inactive. They're on the sidelines. Right, so there is that. On the optimistic take, there is, well, there's a bit of slack. That might not be as straightforward as we think, because those who have stepped away, it's a combination of those higher up the age distribution, maybe retired early, and there is those who, for those, there is a real urgency to work. There's a good number there. This is a story that gets talked about a lot in the US, but it's also visible in the UK to an extent. Financial cushions, fears over COVID, and so there's some people who have stepped away from the labour market. So in theory, there's a bit of slack, but it might not be as straightforward as we think. I think this problem of vacancies will remain right through. Staff shortages and skill shortages will remain right through the year and beyond. The problem with vacancies and skill shortages are widespread, and they're big. So the vacancies are 50% above the pre-COVID level, and you can take almost any sector and you see large levels of vacancies. Finance and insurance vacancies are as big as they've been since pre the financial crisis, never mind the COVID crisis. And it's a similar story across all occupations. What I think this means is there'll be pockets of wage inflation. I'm not yet convinced it will be widespread, and the data is bearing that out so far. But there will be pockets, and the data is showing that. And there's where there's been a real loss of interest in jobs and things like food service and preparation and manufacturing and construction. That's the areas where wage pressures are currently the highest, it seems. So I think the story in the labour market is pockets of wage pressure, widespread remaining contained below the rate of inflation, and certainly inflation over the coming quarters, when is expected to reach 5-6%. But on the job front, I think it's these forecasts that I set out here. Look, I think unemployment will keep inching lower. We reached the pre-COVID kind of low for many decades. It was 3.8%. We're currently at 4.2%. I think we can very quickly reconverge on that in the first half of this year and go beyond it. So I think this kind of strong labour market, hypersonic as some maybe call it, will be a real feature of 2022. I see plenty of momentum behind the labour market and strong job growth. Business surveys point to continued strength in hiring. Oops, went too far there. Right, what about this inflation story? Inflation's got to 5-6%. A lot of it is driven by energy prices. But come April, there's a host of expected changes on people's incomes. How do you lump all that together and provide a useful bit of insight on what it means? So we've got changes in the minimum wage, changes in benefits, energy bills, of course, tax changes all sort of coming in together. Some working to our benefit, some working to our detriment, obviously. And most glaringly, most talked about is the expectations around energy bills. So if the taking where things are at the moment, you're looking at about a 40, perhaps as much as 50, not quite as much as that, but getting on that kind of ballpark in terms of uplift in the energy cap come April. So what this chart does rather usefully is look at what it means for different income deciles when you take all those things together, and you can look at the hit to income there, and you're looking at twos sort of across the board. But I say that the poorest 10% of households it's a significant squeeze. Yeah, it's a significant loss of income, and so that there's a knock on there for spend. Whether for the rest, whether it's manageable, it does depend on where you lie in income distribution. What separates those deciles out is their experience amidst COVID and how much savings have been able to squirrel away. We know that figure's significant. We know it's about 180 billion excess savings. Now that is absolutely huge. It's bearing down on sort of 10% of UK GDP. It's a significant figure, so there is some cushion there for a lot of households up the income distribution to manage that and just save a bit less and continue their spending patterns, doing the services, all the experiences that we expect to happen post-COVID or in the latter stages of COVID. So I think there's some good cushion there and reason to be optimistic. But make no mistake, for some parts of income distribution, this is a big challenge. And I think policy interventions, we talked about more forcefully as that sort of fateful April comes closer. Right, trade. Something I described this. Had it not been for COVID, we'd be getting talked about a lot more. How's our trade performance been? It's not been great. And estimates of our Brexit impact are around, they say about 15%. Exports are about 15% below where that otherwise would be. That is not necessarily terminal. Just be a case of adjustment, a longer period of adjustment for the UK compared to other economies. But there is underperformance here, and that is, I think, something that's certainly not the biggest contributor to the no way. It's all about the consumer and the retreat of consumer caution, the return of sort of appetite for spending on services, experiences, as I say. But this is a drag in the background, and there's further adjustment to come this year. Tightened controls at borders, etc. But it's a telling chart. And it does speak to what is an ongoing challenge for the UK. What's happened here is, so a lot of firms that were exporting to the EU, those lower margin, lower value goods, just been jettisoned in favour of higher margin, higher value goods, just because of the increasing costs become more difficult, etc. So that's hit volumes, and that's been a problem. But more generally, you can describe it as the UK is not shared in what has been a good period for global trade, because of the demand for goods, and what is now expected to turn into an upturn in capital spend, sort of unusually in the early part of the recovery. So this is a feature that's set to be with us for some time, and I think as COVID subsides, it'll start to be debated, and eyes will fall on it a bit more. But it's a sort of difficult, a drag on the background of UK performance. Right. Also we've got rates, of course. Expectations on bank rate. So we've had one hike. Markets are pricing in a further 4, so reaching 1.25%. Really by the end of the year. Caution here, because the past has shown that market expectations on rates have. The reality has fallen short. That's been the story, right? There's been expectations for multiple hikes, and only for them to be actually limited, or for hikes to be put off entirely. So where does that leave us? Because I've talked about a tight labour market, pockets of wage pressure, high inflation. Where does that leave us on a reasonable view for rates? I think you get more rate hikes. I just don't think you get a further 4. A couple more rate hikes seems like a reasonable outlook. You have to try and think ahead to the period in the second half of the year where, in theory, inflation's falling, because you haven't got widespread wage growth. It's only in pockets. Inflation's put a bit of a squeeze on real incomes, and actually across the board, wage growth has fallen short of the pace of inflation. So ultimately, as I say, putting the squeeze on. So you've got retreating inflation. You've got evidence that it's having an impact on spend to a limited degree. And it doesn't take much. If that's the diagnosis, the Bank of England steps back from pursuing further rate hikes. So whether it's a sustained tightening cycle right through the course of the year and beyond, I'm not sure. And there is something, it's not quite visible here, but current market pricing on rates, the curve bends, right? So what they're saying is, we think there's a need for some rate hikes, but a couple of those need to be taken back out because the economy can't withstand them. and some loosening is required to sustain growth. That's effectively what the market's saying. So I think it's just a sort of disagreement on timings and points, and the quantum that the Bank of England gets away with is how I describe that. Right, supply chain shortages related to trade. This is a useful little indicator from the New York Fed. We hear a lot about these, and they have held back growth in construction and manufacturing. November was definitely a bit better. They'll be in the backdrop right through this year. You don't solve a lot of these problems quickly, whether it's drivers or more pointedly semiconductors. A supply response in semiconductors takes years. Huge sums of money being funneled into expand semiconductor manufacturing capacity. TSMC alone are putting in 44 billion. But these are the technological frontier. They are profound challenges, and they're just taking an incredible amount of money and work and time. So the supply response will take a while. I think the concern here is that in time, this leads to a glut, right? So you end up with over ordering because demand shifts back out into services, into the consumer services spend and experiences and holidays, etc. And a lot of firms have ended up over ordering, inventory gluts, and that would kind of make sense in this swinging back and forth until you find a new equilibrium. Perhaps that's probably more story for later in the year. The vast majority of this year will be about the supply issues still biting. Encouragingly, it looks like they might have topped out, and so that, as I said, direction is a bit better from here, but still a problem. That's what this chart's suggesting. Right, very finally, climate. What do we say here? There's a lot chat on the back of COP26. Where are we at for 2022? Really, it's now about the hard work. The hard work starts, and a really useful survey. I mean, look at that. 70% of businesses are either not intending to reduce emissions over the next 12 months, or they're not sure on the actions they can take over the next 12 months to do so. So if you feel a little bit in the dark about this, what you can do, what you might do, you're certainly not alone. And I think that's really the challenge for now for a lot of businesses, and for those that can help businesses understand what it is they can do, what they might be able to do, their options in the race and the transition to net zero, because it will take years and years and decades. It's cross industry, and it is a huge undertaking. And so now it's really about helping firms understand what it is they can do. And I think that's is a good first step for many for 2022. The chart on the top, it does show you things can change quite quickly. So look at the pickup in the carbon price. So market-based mechanisms to incentivize change can happen quite quick. And look at the oft-repeated data on Tesla Model 3, the biggest selling electric vehicle. It was the second biggest selling vehicle in the UK behind the Corsa last year. So change can happen quite quick. The hockey stick, there's a rapid change can happen in short order. There are other things going on here. This chart's really interesting because it's about high gas prices prompting a shift into coal, necessitating the purchase of carbon permits as part of Europe's emission trading scheme, and the inevitable disagreements and arguments that follow in the back of that. And that will be a feature of this, of the climate transition, right? It's the pace at which you go. Some are willing and able to go faster than others, and that will be the drumbeat. But closer to home, it's that voyage of discovery, getting to know what it is you can do, and pressing on with the areas in which you can make a change. Right, I think I've talked long enough. I'll stop there. Are we doing Q&A now, or are we doing it at the end?
We'll take questions at the end. Marcus, thank you so much. It's really good to hear that you have optimism and predicting the 5% growth. I think we'll all take some comfort from that. So thank you for making our day more positive. Right, our final speaker today is a very good friend of mine, Amelia, from the University of Surrey. She joined there in January 2019 as head of the Department of Politics and chair in European and International Affairs. Amelia's researching, teaching, consulting and postgrad supervising covers a wide range of areas on EU foreign and security policy, as well as new forms of EU-UK relations. I think we're all very interested to hear about that. As a long-standing Jean Monnet chair in European Foreign Affairs, Amelia has successfully obtained Erasmus Plus funding for the University of Surrey Centre for Britain and Europe, based in the Department of Politics, and is establishing it in 2020 as a Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Amelia, who will provide us with a Brexit update. I think that's been quite quiet on Brexit because the COVID pandemic has overtaken us. So it'd be good to hear what's been going on. Thank you, Amelia.
Helen, thank you so much. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be able to go right after Marcus. Actually, we have a little bit of overlap, so in those areas, I'll probably speed on through. So I'll touch briefly on Brexit and a little bit of the overlap of COVID. I know Brexit's a horrible thing to try to discuss first thing on a Monday morning, but here's a helpful slide that might give you just a bit of a prompter as to what was signed about a year ago in terms of the trade and cooperation agreement. And you can see the areas, if you like, largely free, fair and sustainable trade, which is the focal point, of course, of the whole agreement, which continues. But it does touch into a whole other area, lots of other areas: transport, energy and fisheries, and thematic cooperation, which is bits and pieces across sector and for the universities, as well as citizen security. I'm particularly interested in things like data exchange and law enforcement and protection of rights and personal data. The way in which it's managed actually is the bottom strip, the governance framework for a lasting cooperation. This is the one that's seen the most amount of bruises and stones thrown at it, because I think it's transpired in the last year. There have been some gaps in terms of the shared values and what constitutes the essential elements. The people doing the running are the Partnership Council, represented on either side. And as you probably heard sporadically in the news when things get dicey, it's the threat of the third point, dispute settlement, either by applying tariffs or enforcing sanctions mechanisms in terms of particular areas like fishing. So 12 months on, as Marcus himself touched on, what we have, of course, is the deal that largely preserves tariff-free, quota-free trade in goods with the European Union. And of course, this hasn't stopped Britain from, the sunlit uplands of international trade. And we have seen a raft of new trade deals, most recently with Australia and New Zealand. And these include the rollover deals, so the UK hasn't had to shift too much in terms of its trade-based relationships with roughly 70 signatory countries, plus, of course, the European Union itself, and they are worth a considerable amount, so in the ballpark of £760 billion, and they are, of course, the first best example of what Britain can do on a trade basis in terms of an independent trade strategy, and making itself attractive to external investment and financial activities to boost the UK's world-class exports. This is led by, obviously, by trade and by Bays in the government. Alongside this, I think there's been a growing conversation about the push for innovation. Much of global Britain is premised on the idea of Britain rolling ahead and breaking new ice, and that it can do so far better without EU membership. At the same time, of course, I think it is a picture that is going to be one of change and of flux, at least for the next couple of years. I think, in fact, COVID has been a bit of a break on that, obviously, but it has forced us, to possibly helpfully reappraise how we understand our supply chains as well. So the transition effect, if you like, which is, I think, something that's really taken place since the end of the transition era, is just getting used to the new, understanding what it means to trade with non-EU countries, to try to find those new areas of growth and what that means nationally and I think locally, and the way in which, of course, Britain is going to continue to focus possibly even more on its services compared to goods from last year as well. Obviously, exporters are going to have to continue to overcome the not insignificant trade and administration challenges. That is not going to go away. The Northern Ireland issue is definitely going to come back with a vengeance this spring as well. There have been, I think, some good responses from the government, just on behalf of the university. The Turing scheme, which is a replacement Erasmus student mobility scheme, has proved wildly popular with vast numbers of higher education and universities applying for it, including us. This allows us to send our students, if not our staff, abroad. And I'm happy to talk about in a bit more detail about that. We have seen additional funds to offset rather more COVID than Brexit impacts, but certainly the idea of regions being supported from the government is fairly clear. I'll come back to the levelling up agenda under the local issues, if I may. Snapshot, I think, as you can see, that the UK trade now devolving to primarily non-European Union countries in addition to the EU itself, and that it's been bouncing around quite a lot as a result. Less good news, of course. In fact, as Marcus pointed out, the UK has not done well. There is, I think, a history of underperformance in the last 12 months, specifically comparable to the European Union. And trade with the EU itself has dropped quite precipitously. In fact, immediately last year, in the first month, the exports fell by 45%. In imports down by 33%. We've recovered a bit of that, but it is, I think it just goes to show how tightly we had been aligned up until then with the European Union. It might leave us, even though we do have a raft of these signatures, with trade friends, actually few trade friends. And it is tough. And I've put a couple of points up there from the European Centre for International Political Economy. UK companies have no markets in which it is now easy to trade. So we can't make those reliances that we used to be able to before. And the barriers, of course, is that trade in the rest of Europe is itself now rising, which is actually not a bad thing. But it is something I think to keep an eye on as well. EU countries, I think, have largely done quite well. They've recovered to pre-COVID levels of trade and activity in general. And our flows, as we've seen, actually with the lowest value relative to GDP since 2009. So I think we have been bumping along the bottom to some extent. I think particularly in terms of local economies, that's where the supply chains have seem to have taken a hit. That's where the most amount of vulnerability seems to have bubbled up. I'm particularly interested in the impact on small and medium-sized enterprises. They too, I think, have suffered disproportionately from the effects of COVID and Brexit, the sort of perfect storm, if you like. Many of whom have experienced lower trade volumes and massive administrative disruption as a result of the enhanced paperwork. And as a result of many have simply stopped exporting. It's just not worth their while. Will there be more spats with the EU? You'd expect me to say yes. It's sort of like catnip for for somebody like me. I'm afraid there will be. I think more importantly, where will those be and when, and what does this mean for being able to plan if you are running an SME? I think the question is, what the strength is. I think many of them are less able to stomach the increasingly higher costs. There will be fresh disruption over ongoing UK delays in preparing for most post-Brexit controls on EU imports this year. I always encourage folks to read the singularly terse but very helpful outputs from the National Audit Office. And there I think you get a very clear narrative of work to try to prepare British traders for import controls, which was incomplete and still needs a lot of work, and it requires, in fact, help from the government, and a suggestion to delay the introduction of full checks on EU goods. That's happened 3 times, and it'll probably happen again a 4th time in September or October of this year. So the UK needs to work harder. It needs to put in place a model for its borders. It's not just Northern Ireland, of course, it's the border with France and the rest of the European Union, to reduce the risk of non-compliance. And we are still non-compliant in some areas with international trading rules. And one that requires just less sort of tweaks, not as many temporary fixes, and is frankly less burdensome and complicated for those border users. A good snapshot here of the pandemic effects, increasing Brexit's overall impact in terms of trade with EU main companies as well. Let's turn briefly, I know time is against us, to regional and local issues. There's been an enormous amount of white noise coming out of government about devolution. This was promised pre-Brexit. It was wrapped into the Brexit campaign. It was then wrapped up into the national election campaign. And in part of the sort of levelling up agenda, we're beginning to get increasing clarity on what this means. And the idea, I think, from government thus far is just basically empowering local leadership. So I'm quoting here, a vital part of levelling up and an ambitious plans to be set out in the much long-awaited white paper. What does devolution mean now? I think certainly it's changed from what it meant a couple of years ago. And I think we're seeing ministers struggling to decide the extent of those further powers, having redeemed them from Brussels to some extent. I think there is a sense that they want to sit on them further in Westminster, rather than undertake what I would have thought would be quite a bold and courageous, deeper and wider devolution with local authorities. But there are, I think, ideas of what those can now mean, various county deals, various forms of combined authorities to the continued use down south of elected mayors. I think this is going to come at a cost, and one of the great costs could be the scrapping of LEPs to try to boost local businesses. I think that for me, that's quite worrisome. I'd like to see the logic behind that. And again, the quote that I put there, very much from the government, the voice of business is critical to levelling up, but they're looking to integrate LEPs into local democratic structures. How that integration is going to work and how it will underwrite rather than undermine combined authorities and county deals, I think is incredibly important. This, of course, is being driven by the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, Michael Gove himself, MP for Surrey Heath. The point, of course, is will these developments benefit Surrey and more broadly the counties? How will they tackle regional inequalities? It's been wonderful to see some local initiatives here, and thank you to everybody, of course, who's on the call for including the university in the Guildford bid for city status. If that comes good, I think that'll be a wonderful fillip. If it doesn't, it'll just give us more opportunity to think carefully about who we are and what we want. I'm always keen on Surrey itself as a case study, and it's provided a huge amount of grist to the mill for work we've done here at the university and in the Department of Politics to gather and to continue to gather a wealth of data gathering and analysis on Surrey itself as a county. So I'd encourage Guildford Borough Council to continue to reach out and work with us, because we're always delighted to put together reports from community-based impact assessments to further investigations. Just a reminder of some of the amazing Surrey specialisms, and this is the focal point of the kind of research we do, the place-based growth and community-based regeneration, which was very much the focus of what we were looking at now. And I dare say will be, I think, some of the logic to being able to build back after Brexit, and I think we're doing that very well, and also to sort of claw back after COVID as well. I think we do have a robust economy here, but as we pointed out, Surrey shouldn't be complacent in this regard. It does face a complex set of strategic and very fast-moving challenges. We do have a very globally significant location. That's wonderful. It allows us to remain very competitive at national and international levels. And as you well know, we are home to, we're sort of driver city, key drivers and key areas of specialism. And that really puts us in a very important position, including high tech and the role of anchor institutions. And that has meant, I think, up until quite recently, we are less vulnerable to economic slowdown. But as Marcus pointed out, it's the evenness we're after. It's the cross-sector evenness. It's trying to make sure that we don't fall into the problems of unemployment in finance and insurance, and being ready for that stretch. I do feel that the emphasis on services rather than goods driven may come back to bite us, and I would want to see sustainability increasingly at the heart of how Surrey plans its way out. So final slide, let's think a little bit about Surrey's own brand of localism, because that's the best way to think about a post-Brexit and post-COVID future here. How can we ensure that we remain a strong economic partner? Who are the right partners here? And how can we make sure that the Surrey economy continues to enjoy fast growth? Where are our leaders within Surrey? And again, I do say, clearly there are threats of long-term stagnation if some of those threats are not addressed. So the 4 drivers we pointed out in our most recent report are the ones I'd like to conclude on. How can we continue to rejuvenate our post-COVID high street? How can we boost our post-Brexit employment and skills? How can we attract and make Surrey attractive in terms of inward investment? And how can we ensure that sustainability and the green economy remain very much at the heart of what we want to do here? So thank you very much, Dawn. I'd be very happy to take questions.
Amelia, thank you so much. Gosh, you got through an awful lot there very quickly. So we will be sharing the slides if anybody's really interested. A lot of facts and figures in there. I was really struck by that fact of the first month experts falling off by 45%. Wow. I think we knew it was going to be high, but that was quite a shocking statistic. it's really interesting. He talks a lot about levelling up and devolution and the white paper. I mean, there are so many unanswered questions at the moment for us in local government especially, and we really do need the answer to some of those questions. Okay, so we've had a few questions put in the chat, and I had some questions sent to me before the meeting. So I'll just take this last one actually first, Amelia, because I think it relates to what you were talking about. What evidence do we have that LEPs are likely to be scrapped, and how do we see local integration happening? I mean, there's just been a LEP review. So I think individual LEPs are considering their futures at the moment. Amelia, do you have anything else to say on that?
Absolutely, I've just put it in the chat there. There has been a lot of media coverage on that. I'm more interested in the various internal docs that have been floating around based to this extent, that they are exactly that, under review. Some of the coverage suggests that they're for the scrap heap. Others suggest actually no, they're not. They're just going to be the nature of what they do for local business is simply to be reapportioned, and I very much hope it is the latter. The strategy for dealing with that, I think, is going to be tricky, because to my mind, they are so much a part of local integration. They make all the difference to being able to facilitate and to boost not just small and medium-sized enterprises, but I think the value and the activity of local services and local industries here. So I, for one, would not want to see them scrapped. I support the idea of maybe reworking their formula, but they're a vital part of how we do business here in Surrey.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'll take a couple of questions that we had earlier. Actually, I'll answer one myself regarding North Street. We had a question earlier asking us about previous North Street schemes, and a scheme that was called St Dominic Square. I believe there were 7 or 8 previous North Street schemes that I've tried to come to fruition. The scheme that we currently have is a venture with Barclays and St Edwards, and I think we've got a really good chance of this scheme getting delivered. St Edwards will be coming in for planning permission very shortly, and we're about to exchange on the contract for it. So very, very hopeful that North Street scheme will happen, and that we'll see a lot more people living in our town centre very shortly. We've also put a link in the chat to Shaping Guildford's Future, which is what Joss spoke about at the top of the meeting, and that's about our ambitious regeneration plans for Guildford, for the town centre, and opening up the riverside. And we're running a number of webinars on that. So some of the questions that we've had today, which were about, there was one about rivers and there was one about smart cities. That's the forum for discussing those, Shaping Guildford's Future. I encourage you all to get involved in that. So we had, what's this? We just had a new question come up about apprenticeships and skills programs, and are they a priority for Guildford to develop businesses and create new opportunities? Would anybody from our panel like to pick that one up? Amelia, as an education provider, is there anything you'd like to say about?
Absolutely, I can't support this. I could not support this more. I think we run a fantastic placement program that allows students, after they've done their first 2 years of study here, to do a half year or a full year of an internship, nationally or internationally, sometimes combined with study abroad. I think it is the most fantastic ability that we have to support students to go out and get practical, experiential work, to tuck it into what we call affectionately our sandwich degree, and to come back and to be able to then have a degree that combines, concepts and knowledge with practical work experience. It really is the very best. And what I want to do is to try to make sure that the students stay here in Surrey and become part of the Surrey workforce. So I've just put a PDF up to the link to the PDF that we did, looking very, very intently at employment and skills, and in fact engaging with Guildford and Surrey County Council folk on that. So I would encourage reading of that report.
Thanks, Amelia. Marcus, does the bank have any specific agenda around skills apprenticeships?
So it's something I'd have to go and look into. I'm afraid. I know we do a lot in this space, perhaps in and around financial inclusion as well. So yeah, there's lots of information I could pass on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Claire, is Claire still on the call? Because we had a question earlier about information security. Claire, I don't know if there's anything that you can say about what the council are doing around that.
Yeah, if it's the question from Dick Wallace, I wasn't clear on whether that was the terrorism threat or the information security threat, which is why I haven't answered it in the chat. But I'm happy to answer from a cyber security point of view. In terms of the council, we are signed up to the LGA's forum on cyber security, and we're also very hooked in with the National Cyber Security Centre in order to make sure that we're aware of the threats and the cyber security threats that councils do face. And there have been a number of very, very high profile incidents, let's say, within the public sector, both in the NHS and a number of councils that have seen their services completely kind of taken apart, really, by cyber attacks. It's an area that a number of businesses have been subject to as well. And if you are subject to a cyber attack, it can be absolutely devastating on your business. It can be months before you can get your services and your business back up and running. And the costs involved are absolutely phenomenal. So certainly at Guildford, we're trying to implement the absolute latest technology in order to combat our cybersecurity threat. We sort of take notice of all the various things that the NCSC ask us to review and deliver, and that does mean that we've been trying to tighten up on a number of things over the course of the last year or two, in terms of migrating services, for example, to more secure platforms. So I can't say too much more because I don't want to give.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Claire. I'm conscious that we've gone over time. A few people are starting to fall away. So just that we're going to take just one last question, actually, which I'm going to pose to Marcus, which we had submitted before registration, which is, how do you see this government balancing its books? You've already answered the second part of the question, which was about long-term interest rates. But Marcus, could you give us a few words on the book balancing question?
Sure thing. So I think it'll be really, really difficult because any efforts to balance books come up against a myriad of demands on public spending in the coming years. We've not properly solved social care. The costs involved in healthcare will only continue to rise with an ageing population. Levelling up, the need for infrastructure investment closely related to that. There is a bit of a hole still on the education side, the impacts of COVID on education and the catch-up required there. So it's a sequence of demands on public spending that will simply make ultimately balancing the books really, really difficult. And yeah, so I think we'll be running budget deficits, not large ones, but budget deficits for years to come.
Thank you, Marcus. And on that note, I'm going to thank our speakers today, Joss, Claire, Marcus and Amelia. Thank you all for joining us. If any of you didn't get your questions answered and would like answers to them, can you please contact Francesca? She's just put her email address in the chat, and we'll be happy to respond to your questions after the meeting. We will send out slides, and thank you all very much for participating, for getting up so early on a Monday morning, and I hope you enjoy and have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.